We've got new information. This is the case out of Florida, of course, involving those classified documents. Probably the longest case in all of the cases involving President Trump, because you've got classified documents, you've got a number of Presidential Records Acts, a number of different laws that come into play. And Jack Smith doesn't like the fact that Judge Cannon in this case went to both sides, the prosecution and defense, and said to propose a jury instruction that she would then kind of mold into one instruction for the jury that they would ultimately get. And Logan, Jack Smith doesn't want the Trump defense team to have any role in this, but he specifically got angry with what instructions they would like to include.
I think we have to really break this down, because I don't think anyone really can understand what we're talking about here. We need to first go, yes, this is the classic case. This is like the original, one of the original cases you've heard about for years.
Right.
This is
the raid on Mar-a-Lago.
This is the raid on Mar-a-Lago. This just takes time. All of these things take a lot of time. So maybe you can explain to us in a bit more layman's terms what's happening right now. So they're going up there, and now there's an argument over who gets to hear the rules or what rules get to be presented.
As you are preparing to select jurors, and you've gone through the grand jury process, so you're getting closer and closer to a court date, you have to come up with an instruction for the jury. What is the jury looking to find in this case while they sit there? So what is the prosecution saying you did wrong? What is the defense saying they did not do, or that it wasn't wrong what they did? So currently, right now, the proposed instructions would take into account the President Trump's view of the Presidential Records Act, which dictates how records created during a president's term must be handled and later archived. And that law does allow for some records to be considered personal property of the president, even some of the classified records. But the Smith team says that would distort the trial. They don't want that at all. They want it only based off the fact that he took national security documents, which we don't know that that's the case, that was all that was found, nor does the judge at this point, because we know that there were thousands of documents taken. Some were given back. Others are being argued about. They still will be argued about. But I want people to understand here is that this is more lawfare. If you were in a criminal situation, okay, and the judge was saying, okay, to your attorney, put forward your idea for a jury instruction, and they're going to go to the prosecutors, put forward your idea for a jury instruction. They're going to mold that together to be as fair as possible to both the prosecution, but especially the defendant, because that's who is actually most protected in the American court system, is the defendant, because you're innocent until proven guilty.
Everyone's heard that before.
So if you took out your entire defense from the jury instruction, which is, do you believe them on this? Do you believe that they believe this? Imagine if they can do this to you, that the only jury instruction would be that you're guilty because you did X, Y, and Z, and it doesn't give another option for the jury. That would be, again, it's ultimate lawfare. It's absurd, but it's also been part, Logan, of this attack on this specific judge because she happens to be a Trump nominee. It's like, because she's a Trump nominee, she has to be disqualified. And that's why, again, we're going to keep explaining all of this to you, because this has huge impacts on how the case moves forward. And this is the case that will take the longest. If President Trump wins election, this case may never happen. There was a filing on Tuesday night from Judge Cannon asking both sides to propose jury instructions that would take into account both Trump's view of the Presidential Records Act, which dictates how records created during a presidential term must be handled and later archived. And it even allows for some records to be considered personal property of the president. And Smith's team that said that if you allow that, it distorts the trial, because we're saying that everything he took is not covered by the Presidential Records Act. But remember, the president can declassify documents, so that will be something potentially that President Trump argues in court. So you can't just have a one-sided jury instruction that says the only thing you're supposed to find is how guilty is Donald Trump based on what Jack Smith said. You have to also provide the jury about what Donald Trump's legal team is going to argue in response to the prosecutors. And so Jack Smith, in a typical move, wants it his way or no other way. And again, he's gone after this judge multiple times. Ultimately, he should have a say. The Trump team should have a say, so that the jury, even though I don't think this case should even be moving forward, but so that the jury ultimately understands what each side is arguing.
Yeah, and what our producer Will just said is that these instructions aren't even handed out until the end of the trial.
Right. This comes at the very end. So you go through a whole trial, and then the judge says, okay, this is what you need when you go back and deliberate. This is what you're trying to figure out. Do you believe that President Trump was doing this in good faith under the Presidential Records Act, or in bad faith taking classified documents? And there'll be a whole list of other things too. But what I point out in this case as well, it's the most complicated case of all of these. Georgia got very complicated because of the whole Fani Willis situation, the appeal now on Fani Willis, and kicking out the special counsel by the judge. So that one's kind of been delayed as well. But this one we always knew was probably not going to be able to be even close to being finished before people started voting for the actual president of the United States, not just the primary being over, but the president. And this, again, shows you why it keeps getting delayed. But you can understand how important a jury instruction is, because that's what the jurors first hear is, you're here to decide whether or not you believe A or B. Do you believe that, for instance, that President Trump had this right? Or do you believe that ultimately you're going after the trial and you've heard all the evidence that you believe that he did not have the right to take these documents or some of these documents? And Jack Smith tried to delete the fact that you could even find that he had at least the right to take some of them, even if not all of them, or all of them, because the law is kind of gray when it comes to the Presidential Records Act. So I think, again, this is the case that is going to take the longest because it involves classified documents. It will certainly not, I don't think there's any way this case comes to a full conclusion before the November election, which means it may become null and void. But that's why Jack Smith is pushing so hard, because a number of his cases have been delayed by the U.S. Supreme Court, by other cases, by local cases out of New York, by the AG, by the DA. I mean, think about how Alvin Bragg you don't hear as much about. I think he's just back in again on some issues. And the fact that, we'll get to it later, that the President Trump was right, as most of us said, that he was not going to have to do $500 million plus, and Letitia James lost, and it was about $140 million. It is covered, and he's got the bond, and no one's seizing his assets.
We just wrapped up our Life and Liberty Drive for March. Now we're in our Life and Liberty Drive for April, focusing more on liberty. Really what I'd say is the liberty side of the Life and Liberty Drive for the month of April. We can't do any of this credible work, whether that is supporting the whistleblowers, whether that is us talking about battling the Biden deep state in federal court. We now have 18 cases currently going on with that. And our goal right now, because of your incredible support, is to now hit 21,000 ACLJ champions. And we're close. So we encourage you, go to aclj.org. Like we said, we are only a little over 100 away from hitting our goal of 21,000 ACLJ champions. That's people who agree to support the ACLJ. Obviously, you can cancel anytime, each and every month on a recurring automatic basis. Do that right now. We really would encourage you to do that. Go to aclj.org.